Special thanks to Catapult Sports for providing us a coach's lounge to sit and talk with coaches on the podcast. And in this episode, we sit down with Jamie Hepner, Director of Applied Sports Science and Football Performance at Catapult. This gives us a little bit of an overview of all the things that we can do with data and technology and the analytics, and there's some fascinating things here, some rabbit holes we definitely could have dove down, but we stayed more towards top level here, really to give you some ideas on how you can incorporate this as a coach as you move forward in developing your team. The important part about all this information, the data, the science, etc., is that it helps you win games and develop your athletes. And that's what we talk about here with Jamie Hepner, Director of Applied Sports Science and Football Performance at Catapult. I'm here at the Catapult booth and sitting down with Jamie Hepner, who's a sports scientist with Catapult. Does a ton of work with NFL teams, college teams, and I think can share some great insight with us today on it's here, it's not coming, it's here. All this technology and the data and the analytics that are really becoming important to this game. Because it helps us win games and helps us develop athletes, right? And ultimately, those things, those wins, the way we develop our athletes leads to a better experience for these guys. So first of all, thanks for taking the time and joining me here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you got to this point, your background, and from the beginning here, getting into the sports science end, that brings you all the way up to working with 19 NFL teams.
Yes, I coached for a number of years back in Australia as a performance coach, working with AFL players, worked at the league there. And then 2015 moved over, and Catapult was a small little operation back then and not the big juggernaut that it is now. And just kind of grown with it there. Now my role is Director of Sports Science and for football. That basically entails consulting with our biggest clients, NFL teams and some bigger colleges on how to make sense of it, not make sense of it, but get something out of it, like translate this data into actionable things. So it's a nice position. After 8 years, it was very different, the conversations and the day-to-day that you have in those first years versus, kind of year 8. It's nice to be able to go deeper, right? Like you're building each year on the guys that you're working with and the coaches that you've worked with and the understanding. And it's not so much like, what does this number mean? It's like, okay, I've got this very good athlete who's got this, or whatever, some specifics and diving deep, which is, it's fun. So it changes by team, but working with our clients.
Yeah, it seems like more and more that the gap maybe between the guys who are the strength and conditioning guys, the sports science guys, the analytics guys, and the position coaches on the field, that maybe gap has definitely been bridged. And I think guys see on the gone field, guys see the importance of this and how it can help them better coach their guys and trying to understand the data a little bit better. Looking at how this progresses from a team, and we got high school teams getting into this now, but a team who gets it in year one versus how they move along. What does that typically look like for an organization?
Depends on the team, the people, I guess, more so than the team, if that coach or whatever is using a previous spot. But, getting started and using this stuff, for me, it's starting up a Catapult's a waste of time and effort and money if it's not going to yield some, tangible results. And, my saying is interesting data for fans, actionable data for coaches. Like this something can't just be like, oh, this happened and cool, like how interesting, or that's higher than whatever. It has to be, okay, what do I do about it?
Right.
And then what do you do about it? It's got to, how much does that make us better? And in a lot of cases, you can apply that philosophy before you even look at the data. Like, what do I want to know? As opposed to looking at this data, tell me something. Okay, I'm going to use Catapult. What does it say? I don't say it. It's number. We tracked what happened. So asking good questions of the data is, I think, a really good step and an important step. And you can do that day one. There's a lot of coaches, a lot of programs will have those things that exist, and I can go into teams and talk for an hour and probably get to some of those just from working in football for so long. You know, like I know there's a challenge in a lot of places with managing the first 10 days of camp.
Yeah,
it's just a difficult situation. Okay, we're going to ask the data, what happened? What do we know to be of high risk? You know, what you're going to get out, and what do we want to achieve? Well, like probably a pretty good starting point of what we want to achieve is be physically peaking for the first game. You've had a month to do whatever you want, right? If you look bad on the first week after having full control over what you did in a month, you know, that's probably failure or less than ideal or whatever that is. Okay, can we use the data to ensure that? You know, I've looked at a number of teams' data years ago, early days, and it was, you look at camp and it's just a regression of intensity. The guys go as hard as they can, and at some point they slow down. If you're about to play your first game of the season, that can be challenging. Maybe sometimes you're playing out of conference and you still win that game because you're playing a lower tier in your first 3 college games. But that's happening less. Like college teams are getting good out of conference opponents more and more now. It's more and more valuable. Playing good football is always good. So that's an example of one of the things. Starting points or whatever. It's a broad answer. But some of the specifics, volume. I think we do that too much. One of the common questions is how much is too much? Like the magic number. To which I usually try and dodge the answer because there isn't one. The reason I consult is not because I have the magic number and you should do Jamie's method. It is understanding the relationship between factors. Understanding the relationship between when I do a lot, I can do too much. When I do too much, I can get tired. And when I get tired, I slow down. Okay, like that's it's a pretty well-established concept, right?
Sure.
And now you can look at the data with that lens and say, how much did you do? Right? Is how fast and intense in your quality output the same? Right? Like, is that still what it was in relation to each other? That's a good starting point. So, do as much as you want as long as you don't slow down. That's a good starting point in terms of concept to apply the data to.
I'm sure you've seen, in working with these teams, guys who, are starting to get into it every year. They're progressing with how they use it. And just thinking of, the position coach and his particular group. How do you see guys using this to help them tailor and develop better practices, better, ways that they're going to use their drills, the amount of distance that these guys run in drills, etc.?
Yeah, it's a really good question, a complex one, because there's a lot of angles to it, right? Yeah. So I'll probably bite off a piece of that and try and answer it. But first and foremost, this thing doesn't replace coaching, right? And that was the early days a real myth to dispel. Like it was, I don't need it, I know how to coach, and absolutely you do. And in fact, the more relevant I can make it to football, the better. For a couple of years there, all I did was watch film in every minute I had because the gap wasn't my understanding of sports science and data. The gap was me deeply understanding scheme, to better than a fan, So it was like talking to the guys I know in the NFL and walking through some, advanced stuff like that to understand it, to apply it. But, a position coach, you're going through, you got some drills or whatever. I'm a big believer in having broad guidelines of physically what does it need to be and what can we do better or whatever, and then operate with however you want it. I like this drill, or I like that we do this, like I want to, blah, blah, blah. Great. Like let's keep that. What are the risks or what are the deficiencies, right? So some examples. There's a high variability in the indie periods that I watch at teams, right? Like in big programs, and some are great, and some are, I think could improve at different times at different, stages of the year for different content. So you got wideouts, running a bunch of fade routes. Okay, we want to work on a fade route. It's a good warm up. It's not fully intense, But if you do 10 minutes of that, in your indie period. There's an implication for how you're preparing for the game that week, right? Like reinforcing non-maximal output can have an effect on your ability to maximally output, right? So you'll be good at whatever you do, put it that way, right? And so a little bit here and there, okay, but if you want to reinforce maximal route retention, progressions or execution, doing them maximally, will help with it. So you got a high schooler, he needs to get better at running a dig. Okay, maybe that concept doesn't apply. If you got 5-star athletes at a school and your players are good, so that progression, I think, is a big one, right? Like understanding, what do we need here? This player's already very good, and I'm wanting to work on this one little thing and rehearse these routes. Maximal as much as possible, is a big one. And then, so you say that. So, like you said, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to see? And then you just compromise and break down from there. Like, you cannot run 20 minutes of Indy non-stop with a group of 5 wide receivers maximally. Like that, that doesn't work, and that's why we do things. So we either need to compromise intensity, which is common, or if we want to be intense, which I think is preferable, just compromise how we do it, right? So maybe it's 3-minute chunks, right? So you netted less Indy time, right? Well, we don't want to do that. We want to maximize practice. Okay, I'm with you, but what if there's a competitive advantage to compromising some of total work in that period by doing more quality work? So you do 20 minutes, you'll probably do less max reps than if you did 5 3-minute stints maximally. So it's weighing up these things and then looking at the data on how they produce results. But I will say that practice quality, I think, is the biggest determining factor in football programs for getting better. From however good you are, the amount of practices you have, whenever you're doing those practices hundreds of times, across a 5-year career or high school for whatever, is the factor for getting better or worse or whatever you do. Like I said, whatever you do, you'll get better at.
So we talked a little bit about looking at the individual periods there. There's the aspect of the team periods, and essentially that should start to mimic something what the game looks like. And so you can't just be out there running plays at tempo up and down the field when in reality the drives you might run are maybe 6 plays or 8 plays, right? And there's going to be time. When do I work my 2s in or 3s in? And save those guys in there too. Create practices though that also team periods also prepare you for the game.
100%. So this is a really interesting one. So there's no one way, right? So there's a lot of ways to diffuse this bomb, and starting with the same question, what do I want the result to be, is a good one. But then there is some sports science that comes into it, right? So, okay, what do I want to be? I want to, be able to be maximally intense on the weekend. We're going to run this type of, offense, right? It involves, it's pass heavy, and maximal drive length of this, likelihood of this, understanding that, which is pretty straightforward to establish. But then, how do I best get there? How do I best, what do I expose you to during the week to get you there? And that comes down a little bit to need, but also understanding the conditioning element. So, yes, you want to replicate the game in some ways, but just if we played 4 games of football a week, we wouldn't necessarily be improving, right? So, which parts of the physical aspect are we trying to replicate, and which parts are we watering down? A marathon runner doesn't run a marathon every day to prepare for a marathon, right? They run at race pace, right, and dose it, right? They do smaller doses in it. So the training effect comes in, right? A good way to measure how much, right, is did I fully recover from it before the next one, right? So that's a pretty good general rule. And there's some basic ways to understand that. You could just ask players how they're doing. You could say, are you as good today as you were yesterday? There's some basic ways. So that's the how much. You don't want to play a game, but you want to do something, some amount of a game. And then the rest of it, yes, you can fully replicate it, i.e. have a stopwatch between, for huddle length, X amount of play drives, that sort of thing. But you'll never, if they have to go up a gear or overtime, those sorts of things, you're setting a ceiling, right? If you're always exposed to a certain stimulus. So engineering slightly some of the variables. So an example is if you want to increase the total intensity, having a little more rest between each one, can be a way of, like actually we ran faster during the week than we did on Saturday, and now Saturday is a little bit easier in that sense. If it's the opposite, if you want to run tempo and grind a team, decreasing it, by a little amount and running short drives so you can get through them safely can be a way of engineering. So in practice, we give you 20 seconds rest between snaps. Now, on Saturday, I see 27 on average or whatever. This ain't so bad, So gently overexposing to the one aspect of that you're trying to enhance can be a good way.
So, taking things to the special teams phase, and I've had coaches on the podcast just talk about that, how those definitely are reps. If you're running full reps, that there's a lot of run in them, and being the guy sitting in the room, the reports came back and everybody's numbers are up as far as their volume. Everybody looking at that guy. So, how have coaches really looked at that in terms of creating, something that has limited practice time, right? Everybody doesn't spend all their practice time on special teams, but being able to be the most efficient in how you create those practice periods that are going to get you ready for game day.
Oh, there's no good answer for that one. That's a tricky one. Being creative, you got that one. I mean, there's just a number of ways you can go. There's no right. Do you? Okay, we need to expose you to what you're going to do, so what to do and where to be on punt coverage, and then you need to have rehearsed it at full speed, right? Okay, yeah, I get that. Let's do that as much as you need to. Needs a relative word, but need to.
Right.
And then. But then can you compromise? Like, is there something I know we're good at or fine or could live with to rob Peter to sell Paul type of deal? And that kind of seems a bit silly or whatever, but maybe with rule changes and good kickers, like if you're going to just smoke it out of the back of the end zone on every kickoff, do we need to practice kickoff coverage if we can count on that? What's the likelihood of it? Now, that made a lot more sense in my mind before the weekend. Since watching the Bills, so maybe it's not. Maybe I'll shelve that one for a while. But coming up with these ideas, and I guess working within the confines of the limitations that we have, that I kind of said before, like having the freedom to operate, but under preferably where possible, don't go over this. Like diminishing returns, right? Like I need to expose them to special teams. Okay, how much? This much. Okay, it's this much over, and they got tired, and it compromised our game day. So like every extra one that you did took something away from this weekend, and so understanding if you're gonna do that, what it's gonna cost you, and I think that's where the numbers can come in.
Right,
so not setting rules of like you should do special teams this much or not do it or whatever.
Right.
It's okay. We need to do this, and if I do it as a decision maker, as a coach, what does it cost me? And that empowers your decision, whatever that decision is going to be, a lot more. If you suck on the weekend and you need to do some more of this, okay, like the physical component of this next coming game is less likely to make us win or lose than this part of our tactical, understanding, like practicing more, right? So knowing that, we've got to practice more, and we can practice till we're a bit tired. That's fine. Like if you make that decision, but knowing how much, that's a key point, and having the data not dictate what you do, but empower your decision, inform your decision.
In looking at, I think both the recruiting side of this, but also just how you're going to build your team, build your offense, build your defense, etc. I think the one thing as this technology becomes available to everybody, right? And Catapult 1 being affordable for the high school level, I think even the individual athlete, and more now kind of standardizing the data on what an athlete looks like, right? I mean, we go back to the old days in the the data was somebody with a stopwatch who may or may not have a fast finger, may or may not be taking some tense off of it. But now, I mean, this data is not going to lie, right? It starts to be standardized in what athletes look like, and I think in my mind, I'm looking, how I might use something like that is, I'd really want to know, what kind of data, what do I need for these particular plays that are in my playbook? How do they fit together? What kind of athletes do I need to run these? What am I really looking for? I mean, because we talk about it all the time. We want our players to be in a position to be successful. We want to put them in those positions. And to me, this is probably as good of a tool as any that we've ever had to be able to start doing something like that. Now, it certainly takes some thought process in how we get there and what that might look like. But I definitely see that, and I'm sure coaches already are doing this, the guys you have, that this is a tool really that can help you do that.
Yeah, I've certainly seen it done a good amount. And it's really, it's a more advanced approach and really moves the bottom line, like tangible results. It comes down I want to run this scheme, understanding what it needs, all that sort of stuff. So there's two iterations of that in my mind. It is, I want to run this scheme, so let's build or recruit or whatever, get players that suit it, right? And so from the physical standpoint, all that, like can he, can't he, right? Or the flip side of that is, these are the players I got, and this is what they can do. Build a scheme to suit, So, if you're in a really good high school division, and you got 190-pound linemen that are freshmen, not as big as your opponents, right? Winning games run heavy, unless you're going to get the edge every play, probably ain't going to work. What are your strengths? The Bill Belichick model, the Sun Tzu art of war, right? Find an opponent's weakness and exploit it. So, what are we better at than the opposition than they are? What are we better than them with? And then where can we expose that? So having a scheme that's really pass heavy, that's just a spread, air raid type of deal. There's a demand for that. There's a high running demand, and there's a tolerance demand, right? They have to be not only fast to be able to run, but they have to do it a lot. They have to be able to do it a lot. And so understanding if your players can do that, and if they can't, prepare them to be able to do that. And that's a reasonably straightforward process. And then it's okay if your linemen are stand and deliver pass pro guys. In fact, it's probably better. You're going to run a whole bunch and run a whole option stuff. Those big boys got to be able to move. A, can they move? And B, can they not get injured when you move them a lot? Are they mobile? Are they tolerant of running? And so there's some clear things that you can look at. Even if it's not can they, it's have they done it before?
Right.
That's a good way of looking at it. Right. It's I don't know if they can or can't, and there's some subjective nature in that. But if they have never done it before, have the utmost confidence that they will be able to do it. That's a shaky line. He's done it before. He's done it for the last 2 years. He's done it in this setting or whatever. He can. We know he can. Whether it's in college or pros or recruiting, that's a pretty good method. But then the question is how, right? Once you see that number, yes or no, have or haven't got it, how do you get there? So let's say it's lots of running. That's a common one. We're going to pass it a lot. We've found some guys that we think are capable or could be capable. How are you going to get there or retain it? One of the big I think misconceptions that I've seen is, so you take that and then you say, well, what could it be if we were better? And you try and develop too much. You try and get better at too many other things, which compromises getting better at all the things. It lowers the ceiling. So if running quickly a lot is the objective for this position group, modifying certain parts of practice to be able to do that more than you could previously, meaning some rest or making practice not as long, because I see guys break with 500 yards of 12 miles an hour distance. I can do that and not break. So the point is that those players didn't break because of their high speed distance alone. They broke because they did all this other stuff, right? And then the high speed distance was the straw that broke the camel's back. You could do triple that with some more engineered practice, like just having some more rest in there, like shorter play drives, generally shorter practices and doing more of them in the week, doing your fast running before they're tired at the end of practice. Maybe your team drills come forward a little bit. Like there's ways you can get creative if that is your priority.
Yeah.
But there are some meaningful benefits in running faster life.
So.
Roundabout answer, but yeah.
As you were talking about that, one thing that came up is just got me thinking about it, like in looking at the quality of how you're running a play or running a defense. We talk about all the time, we want our players to play fast, like it's almost cliche, of course. We want them to play fast. Have any coaches used, the technology to say, we execute this play, close to our players are running their optimal speed or whatever. Something to it in their learning, right? Guys will slow down if they don't know the learning.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just very subtle. Have guys used it to discern, like, this play is really good now. We're performing it really well, physically, optimally in what these guys have? Were there?
Not as much, because the film is king,
Right.
and I think that still remains so that you can come to that conclusion almost without the data, but there are a number of aspects where something similar we look at, like more of a broad, these plays or this whole period or this practice was good
Less
or
than
bad
optimal.
or whatever, and then that's interesting, but actionable, like we started with, is what caused it and what can we do about it. That's a really, really common one. So it's like evaluating with all the context, as much context as you can. So here's a common scenario, right? Like, I do this team period and I have the same breakdown and this is the way I run practice, and these players have seen it many times, right? And this week I did it and it yielded different results. They look bad today, and 4 weeks ago when I ran that exact same practice, they didn't. Effort. They put in effort, I'm going to yell at you, or I'm going to say, whatever. But that's looking at it with the lens of this practice versus this practice. A player is only, is going to be able to perform relative to his status going into that practice. Meaning, if he's tired this week than he was 4 weeks ago going into practice, the results will differ. He will run slower, whatever, a number of things. So establishing, like, there's two cornerstones of, will I play well or will I practice well this week? Like if we're saying game day performance, like I want to just play well in all the games, absence of fatigue and presence of quality work recently. Right? Like how tired I am, and that's a sliding scale, like a glass, how full is the glass of how beat up or tired, or like residual fatigue, carryover fatigue that I'm carrying today or from previous things. And then like when was the last time I went? That's a CNS, central nervous system thing. Like, and I use the example of if you worked all week, went home on a Friday, took a sleeping pill, sat on the couch and watched movies, had 12 hours good sleep both nights. When you got up for work on Monday morning, would you be ready to go? You'd be flat, right? Like all that just lying around and sleeping. But so it's not just fatigue that we're talking about here. Like you do not have fatigue because you just rested that whole time, but you still don't feel as to play football.
Right.
And so the balance of this, like how much fatigue do we have as a residual, and when did you do some last good stuff, is a really good starting point, and a pretty easy one to establish.
Yeah. This is all great stuff, and there's a ton of rabbit holes I want to dive down with you. Maybe we could get you back on the podcast and focus on some specific things. But I love the overview that you gave our listeners here today, and of course our listeners can go to Catapult and learn more about this. But I appreciate you taking the time here. It's great to meet you here at AFCA.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Once again, thank you to Catapult Sports for providing us the space to talk with coaches at AFCA. We have more of these coming up this week with position coaches as well as other sports scientists. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.